and somebody we admire very much and who has come all the way down from Boston to be with us today. Rick Leskowitz is an MD. He is a psychiatrist at the Spaulding Rehab Hospital, affiliated with Harvard's medical school. And he has pointed out that his affiliation with Harvard is not because, but in spite of the fact that he has been associated with us for many years. So we're making progress. Rick is also the director of integrative medicine or the Integrative Medicine Task Force. He's particularly interested in energy medicine, in anomalies, and most importantly, he is a lifelong Red Sox fan. And he's done some wonderful research that he'll share with us today. And Rick, welcome. Glad to have you.
Well, thank you, Brenda, Bob, for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk here and to reflect on some of the interactions I've had with GCT, here, ICRL over the years. Just by way of background, it is true that I'm Boston-based and my heart is there. Maybe, I guess it was inevitable that you realize that I'm a Red Sox fan. I don't know how much that's going to get me into this audience here. There's probably a lot of divided loyalties. Yankees, Mets, Phillies, totally neutral. That's the sanest approach. But there's a lot of passion involved in sports, and that was part of my getting involved in this work. I'm a holistic psychiatrist. I've always been interested in mind, body type of things. I work in a pain management program. Is that?
You need to.
Yeah.
Maybe microphone.
So is this you guys can hear me okay, right? So it's more for the registering on
The audience.
Yeah.
Okay. So, one more try without the microphone. So if I talk at this volume, is that okay?
I don't know, Michael, can you hear?
I can, but
All right. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Does that improve?
Great, thank you.
Better? Okay. Let's do this now.
Now you have to hold.
I know, that's the thing. And for this, so I'll advance the slides. Okay. No, so I work in a pain management program. That's actually a good opportunity because the normal approaches usually don't work for our chronic pain patients. So we have the medicines and injections and whatnot. So they're open to things like biofeedback, yoga, and a lot of energy-based therapy. So over the last 25 years or so, I've had a lot of exposure to things like therapeutic touch and Reiki, the invisible healing energies. And I'm convinced that they're real because I've seen the benefits to the patients. I've written about it a little bit, but never really had a good vehicle for putting the ideas out there in a more mainstream way until the Red Sox won the World Series in 2004. That actually, the wave of excitement that swept through New England was like the best antidepressant I'd ever seen. You know, each region of the country has similar things with the soccer team or the football team or whatever does well, but it really got me to think about sports as a way that people can relate to group energies, whether you're at the stadium or whether you're just at home watching locally or distantly. So I wrote a little bit about it. My cousin is a filmmaker, and I'll show you in the course of the slideshow how it came about. But the important thing is that the scientific basis has been validated to a great degree by the work that comes out of Princeton, but it goes way back. So what I want to do in this talk is touch on the roots, the historical roots going all the way back to Mesmer, and show how the Red Sox illustrate some of the same principles that Mesmer worked with, and that the applications are kind of infinite. And I know the format here allows for a lot of question and answer. So if there's something that comes up during the presentation, you can raise your hand. I don't mind taking time then. But afterwards, I think we'll have a nice block of time for Q&A. So let's go with that then. So group energies are things that people experience in all kinds of formats and settings, whether it's a religious event like this, a political event like this, although some people say this was also a religious type of event. Musical event. In the movie version of this, there's a little arrow that says, "That's not me." I wish I had been there, but I was busy at the time. And different types of music create different types of vibes, different types of energy, and you kind of gravitate to the vibration that you're most attuned to. And even professional meetings. This is a professional meeting that works with energy psychology, and a lot of people go there because the group energy is palpable. And it's what attracts you to meetings like this, because you can feel something intangible but measurable. And that's really the challenge that I've been addressing. So this was the type of group energy that really appealed to me. And this was when the Red Sox, it's amazing. It's already distant history, but it took 10 years for this all to come to fruition. But they did have an amazing comeback. And I took a tape parades, and I took this picture. So, okay, enough of the personal aggression. So this is an op-ed I wrote for our regional newspaper about the weird science aspects, that there were some anomalous aspects to this whole SOX phenomenon, and I thought that was the end of it. But my cousin is a filmmaker, and unbeknownst to me, he did some behind-the-scenes stuff. So that the Wednesday after this came out, he called me up and said, "So what are you doing on Saturday?" And I said, "I don't know. What am I doing on Saturday?" He said, "We're going to Fenway Park to start filming our documentary on the Red Sox." And I said, "What documentary on the Red Sox?" He hadn't told me about it, but he had spoken to them. He said, "Did you see that op-ed?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "Well, we'd like to film to document this." And they said, "Sure." So because of his filmmaking background, he made it all happen. And it took the form of a video. And what I'm going to show you at some points is some clips from that about how we presented these ideas. But I also want to give you some background on sort of the history of weird science. It's a phrase that goes back to after World War II, when there were, death rays and anti-gravity and aliens and all sorts of stuff. And it just became part of our culture, but in a fringe way. It turns out that tradition goes back a couple of hundred years, at least from Western science's point of view, to Franz Mesmer. He was a physician in Austria in the late 1700s who had a mystical bent. His medical school thesis was on the influence of the planets and the internal organs, or medical astrology. That was not part of my curriculum when I went to medical school, but it showed that he was thinking about things differently. This was also the era when magnets had been discovered. People were working with lodestones and what have you. He felt that he could generate his own sort of magnetic field that he called animal magnetism. That's the phrase that's most associated with him, through his own hands. So he developed a healing technique which looks like he's just stroking the air around the person. And he had all sorts of accoutrements to help bring the people into this focus state. And I'll describe that because the ingredients that he stumbled upon or discovered back then are still applicable and used, even nowadays. There was a movie about him starring Alan Rickman, and the reason I like it is because he was, the drum roll in the background is charlatan, fraud, or genius. So 1 out of 3 isn't bad. Things are, usually presented. So he created a lot of ascension. He wrote it up. He did have a scientific bent. And so this is his thesis about animal magnetism. And there were 27 key principles. And I want to highlight 4 of them because they're so resonant with what we know from energy medicine now, 200 years later. Subtle fluid, there's a connection between planets, the Earth, and man. Think about some of the work with grounding, electrical grounding, and living organisms now. We use a different word than what we would describe, but it's the same process. Illnesses come from the unequal distribution, and restoring balance is the key to recovery. And that's the theme from Eastern medicine, it's a theme from holistic medicine, but it's not a theme from Western medicine, where we just try to blast the symptoms into oblivion, and hopefully people can recover and move on. The idea of finding equilibrium is a key point for him. And that there were inner channels that help people to direct the flow of this animal magnetism. So he's talking about acupuncture, meridians, even though that wasn't part of his background. Oops, sorry. He had no exposure to Chinese medicine either. And the last one is a healing crisis could be provoked that would allow the symptoms to come to the surface and the system to clear the symptoms. It's very similar to what homeopathy talks about now. But again, it's totally different from our focus on suppressing the symptoms. So here's what happened when he tried to apply it. This is not actually him. You can see the rays coming from the hands of the treater to the patient. It was popular in the aristocracy. And it was typically a male treater and a female patient. But it became so popular that he began to draw patients away from the prominent doctors in Paris. And he couldn't treat everybody individually. So he actually developed a form of group therapy. And the cornerstone of it was this container of water that he had magnetized with his hands, and it had metal rods coming out of it so that multiple people could feel the magnetic connection at the same time. So he's working with groups in a way that had never been done before. And this is a larger group. This is the healing salons that he had. We could have dozens of people. And, what kind of injury he had to his leg, but that could be treated. And people would often have very dramatic, emotional, psychophysiological reactions. And that was very common. There'd actually be a wave sweeping across the room of whatever symptom. It could be fainting spells. They actually talk about convulsive laughter, an epidemic of laughter sweeping across the room. Just the idea that emotions were contagious and could spread. And this notion of a wave is really important, because that will come up a couple of years later in one of the slides I'll show you. So this is one of the I forget which museum it is, but a lot of technical care and craft went into making these plaquettes, as they were called. And there's a modern version of it. I don't know if you remember the Orgasmatron from Woody Allen. So we have our high-tech versions of mesmerism as well. Around that time, do you recognize Ben Franklin?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He was more than just a diplomat, as I'm sure you know. He was incredibly creative as a musician. So he invented this musical instrument called glass harmonica.
Mm-hmm.
And, often you drink champagne, but if you rub your finger around the rim, it makes a musical note, and you get everything just right. You have different size rims. You can play songs by jumping from glass to glass. He found a way to nestle one in another so that his foot would pop the pedal, the whole array would rotate. And by putting his fingers on the selected glasses, he could play chords and music. The reason I'm mentioning this is because he was ambassador to Paris at the same time that Mesmer was practicing. And Mesmer actually used his music, not with him playing, but in the background. So he used music to help deepen the emotional impact of his work. And the sound of the glass harmonica is so ethereal that I want to just give you a quick demonstration. This is a piece that was written by one of the top composers of the time, Mozart, actually, wrote for the glass harmonica. So hopefully the audio won't blast. So I use that to highlight how music was used back then to deepen the state of attentional focus. And we'll see from some of the modern measurements that music, again, is very, very powerful. Well, everybody knows that from our own personal experience with music. So Mesmer came to the attention of the authorities who were not pleased, so they convened a royal report from the Royal Society, the French Royal Society, and they had all the scientific bigwigs of the era, Lavoisier, who discovered oxygen. They had one of the leading surgeons of the day, Guillotine, who is best known for his device, the guillotine. In a way, he was the founder of mind-body medicine because he proved that there are adverse health effects if you separate the mind from the body. But they did some really important work. They actually did scientific experiments where they blindfolded people to see if they could tell whether they were being mesmerized or not, or whether a particular tree that had been mesmerized, magnetized, could be detected. So they deserve a lot of credit for setting up some of the first blinded protocols. What they concluded was that magnetism does not exist, and it was all the power of suggestion. And that's important too, because suggestion plays a key role as hypnosis developed. That's the key element. However, they didn't use skilled magnetizers. They actually used skeptics to do the magnetizing. So, protocol-wise, it's a pretty big flaw. And yet, because they were the authorities, their decision was what mattered. And he basically got run out of town because he was deemed quack. And that's a theme that I think people that the pair and ICRL, etc. folks can resonate with, because authorities have a hard time dealing with points of view that don't fit their political needs in this case. Some of the clinical data from mesmerism came from a Scottish surgeon who went to India as part of the empire and treated people with mesmeric anesthesia. So this movement, if you did it for an hour or so, it took a long time. People would get so relaxed into basically a catatonic state that they could be surgically operated on and not feel anything. And this monograph lists 50 different treatments and procedures that he did, and it's major internal organs type stuff. They healed quickly too. They didn't get infections, so it was really way ahead of its time, and would have swept the world, except for something that happened in Boston. This is a kind of picture of Boston. I've not seen it, but it's the development of chemical anesthesia, ether. This is in what's called the Ether Dome Surgical Amphitheater at the Mass General Hospital. This is 160 years ago, and the process took seconds for the person to be anesthetized. They could obviously perform surgery, and they recovered quickly. Anybody could do it. It didn't take hours and hours. So within a few years, this chemical anesthesia had totally replaced mesmeric anesthesia, and it left sort of mesmerism to be the dustbin of history, except for some of the new developments that are coming along. So here's I had an opportunity to give a talk at the same Ether Dome, the pain management program at Mass General. You can't see it here, but my title was on Mesmer and hypnosis and the role of pain management. And it was a really extraordinary feeling that I was kind of reclaiming that territory for mesmerism and all the alternative medicine and intangible forces and whatnot. So that was a professional delight to be able to do that. So we know a lot more now than Mesmer knew about human energy fields. And thanks to the awareness about biomagnetism, these kind of diagrams are not fanciful anymore. People in California, the Heart Math Institute, it's a matter of half an inch whether it blows you out or.
Sorry.
A rock star. I always wanted to be, so this is my chance.
Just keep it closer to your mouth and just speak over the top of it. Try that.
All right. Yeah. Maybe.
Well,
That,
maybe not that close, but.
But that holds the distance.
Okay.
And is this a good volume?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Very good.
We'll go with this.
Over a Coke bottle.
Yeah. Another kind of resonance that we'll be talking about. So the heart actually generates the most powerful electromagnetic field of the body, more so even than the brain, which is kind of surprising, but the heart has to be regulated by electricity and therefore generates magnetism. So the group at the HeartMath Institute in California has worked with this particular quality and in kind of tune with this vision of human anatomy that, you know, Gray's Anatomy books, it's just muscles and bones, and we're just nuts and bolts, but this is a modern, you can almost say it's a modern version of Gray's Anatomy because the artist who did this is a fellow named Alex Gray, and he's actually not related to the original British guy. That would have been a very cool kind of karmic return, but still, the notion that we have all sorts of glowing energy centers and lines and fields around it is, I think, much more accurate because it's more complete than muscles and bones type of model that medical school and, you know, most clinical trainings involve. So there has been a lot of interest. This is a book that came out maybe 30 years ago about the notion of vibrational medicine. And what I like particularly is the cover because it's called a Kirlian photograph of a leaf. This is a photographic technique that can detect the electrical field around objects that are small enough to be put between the two plates of the photographic device. So this is a healthy leaf with the field around it. Just as a quick sideline, what do you predict the Kirlian image would look like if the bottom tip of the leaf was cut off? So often people will think that this part will curve around because it's generated by the leaf and it will follow wherever the leaf part substance is. But interestingly enough, the electrical field persists even though there's no leaf tissue there. So how can that be? It certainly doesn't fit our sort of intuitive way of thinking about it. But if you think about the lines of force in a magnet, they're invisible until you sprinkle the iron filings there. So if you swept away some of the iron filings, the lines of force would still be there. The analogy is that if you think of the cells of our body as iron filings that are lined up according to some invisible energetic field, whether it's from the acupuncture meridians or the chakras or what have you. So the energy is still there, even if the cells are. There's a clinical syndrome that is an exact mirror of that. Does anybody have anything that comes to mind about what's related to that?
An amputee that's lost a foot still feels it?
Exactly right. An amputee can feel where the foot used to be. Sometimes it's painful. And there's some studies that we've done about the role of emotional trauma, that when you can release the emotional trauma, the energy field clears up and the pain goes away. It's very cool because you can actually feel the energy field around the missing limb. These kind of sensing tests, you can feel your own where there's a hand, but you could also feel it where the missing limb is. So it looks like there's a very different model of what pain and illness is. And then just one more sideline. Oh, well, who's this? Yeah, and there could be something to this, to bring together two phantom limb people, to have them touch their phantoms together. The model predicts that they could feel it. I don't know how the arm wrestling would work. But, and so this is the image that underlies it. So just one more quick sideline. This is a picture of cell division, mitosis, the division of the chromosome splitting. Just look, this is one individual cell. Just look at the pattern. I have no idea why that is, but it's an exact morphologic equivalent of the magnetic field of one bar magnet. So something at a micro magnetic field level is happening within the cell. So anybody wants to do a research project of that. So just to follow up with the HeartMath stuff. The heart isn't a metronome. It doesn't beat exactly regular. And the variations, the intervals between the beats, have their own sort of pattern to it. what they found is that different emotional states have different patterns. And that when you're frustrated, for example, your heart rate varies kind of all over the place without any regularity. But when you're in the emotional state of appreciation, the heart rate varies in a very regular sinusoidal pattern. Once you get to that emotional state, your physiology flips to align with it. And so their whole model has been about how the magnetic field of the heart entrains the rest of the body. The rest of the body resonates with the heart and comes into this state of what they call heart coherence. So I went out there and was a guinea pig in one of the tests that we did. You can see I was blindfolded, couldn't hear anything. I was hooked up to the monitor that basically measured my heart rate and was told to just relax. So I just did my own sort of mindfulness relaxation thing and felt calmed down, knowing that at some point a group of heart math practitioners would join me into the room. But I didn't know when that was going to happen. So the question was, after they settled themselves in the chair, they got a signal from Roland McCrae, the director, to go into that focus of appreciation on their own hearts. They knew from practice that they could shift into that heart coherent pattern. And the question would be, what effect, if any, would it have on me? Sort of the normal way of thinking about it, you'd say, well, nothing. I mean, you know, their hearts are there, and my heart is there, and it's empty space in between, so how could that possibly be? But obviously, the reason I'm here is because something did happen. This is the graph. One way of looking at it is this is my heart rate, kind of erratic, and then shifting into the sine waves when they started their appreciation. But this is the more graphic graph. This is the degree of heart coherence that I was in just in my relaxation state prior to them coming into the room. And I was just kind of bumping on a little bit of that sine pattern, sine wave, but not too much. They came in there and started their heart appreciation, and within 30 seconds, my coherence level went up and up and up and up and up, and just literally through the roof. By being entrained, it was literally like tuning forks. Like they were a tuning fork resonating at the note of appreciation. And my nervous system resonated in response to it. Even though we weren't physically touching, even though they weren't speaking, I didn't know cognitively when they entered the room, when they were starting their meditation. So I was blind in that respect, and yet the correlation was total. So it suggests a lot, actually, that in terms of emotions being contagious, that there may be some kind of resonance or vibrating between different emotional magnetic fields. There's a paper about it, if you're interested in the science part of it, that can be downloaded from my website. And so this was sort of the question: what happens if you get a lot of people in the same emotional state at the same time? What effect would that have? And this is how the Red Sox fans get themselves into emotional state. He's one of the the most rabid, I guess rabid in the sense of rabies type of Red Sox fan, and he would do that to get people in a happy frame of mind. Let me just go to this one more time. So the implication is that if enough people are in that resonant state, the ball players, even if they're a little bit nervous or worried about what's happening, they can get trained into it. And when you're in that state of mind, your mind-body coordination improves. They've done studies about reflexes, for example, being improved by 1 millisecond in the time it takes a pitch of baseball to get from the pitcher's mound to the batter. So what Roland described it as is, it says that a 90-mile-an-hour fastball looks like it's only going 80 miles an hour when you're in that state of alignment. So you can imagine what a huge competitive advantage that would be in that particular setting. So these are some of the implications and the applications of that particular form of group resonance. If the fans could be led before, this is my fantasy, it didn't actually happen, but before all the games, they sing the national anthem and they have some sort of public service announcement or something. I thought, why don't I go on the Jumbotron and just leave everybody in the 2-minute heart meditation? Didn't go anywhere. I still think it would be cool. So, so that's one level of group energies through the electromagnetic field of the heart. Another level is a little more difficult to understand and explain, and that relates to the work that come out of Princeton. One way that the popular culture talks about this notion of mind being able to affect physical objects at a distance is in a movie that came out, I don't know, it's probably like 15 years now, called The Cooler. Did anybody happen to see it? It was not a blockbuster type of thing, but William Macy kind of was typecast as a sad sack, but a sort of character, who had an influence on people. He always jinxed them when he was near them. And one of the casinos figured out that every time he walked by somebody on a winning streak, the streak would end. So he was actually hired to be the cooler, as they called it, cool off a hot streak. And he was great at it because he was so miserable in his life. The movie's twist was he meets Maria Bello and he falls in love. What happens? He loses his ability to be a cooler, so he has to choose between love. It's quite sweet. But the idea is that a random event, like the throw of a die, could be influenced by some sort of human intentions or interaction. And of course, that's what the PAIR project and the Global Consciousness Project is all about. So at one level, this is exactly the same. This was from the old lab that people would meditate or intend to alter the distribution of the flow. Do you know, are you familiar with this device? It's hundreds or maybe thousands of small, like marble-sized balls would be dropped in at the top here, and they encounter pegs. So they bounce either to the right or the left, come down to the next level, right or left. And it would be spread out, and after they end up in this, what's called a normal distribution pattern. Most of them were 50-50 down the middle, but further away from midline, fewer and fewer. So this is a known statistical pattern. The crazy thing that they did here in Princeton was to think that this person's thoughts could influence that pattern. And they found that to a very small degree, but repeated over time, reliably, the whole graph could shift a little bit over to this way or to that way. These are physical objects. They're, I don't know how much they weigh, like marbles or something, but that somehow their behavior was influenced by mental thought. We tend to think of that as occurring inside our brain, so maybe that's one of the real values of the work here, is that there's solid statistics over 30 plus years now to show that that's a valid point. So let me just show you a clip from the movie that is the part that's based here. Some of the video was actually put together by the peer group, and it's really very good quality stuff. So, just a second. And in One for All. And the fans lost their mojo too. How the team chemistry
Negative proof of how important chemistry is.
One particular year with the Red Sox.
It's hard enough to measure these invisible energies in people because there are so many individual variations, psychology, mood, you name it. That's why it's really nice to have a machine that can detect these energies. And that's why the work that came from Princeton University is so important to this whole field of consciousness research. I know it sounds crazy, but they've demonstrated that machines can detect the impact of human thought, of human attention.
Popular culture believes that thoughts can affect the external world. William H. Macy used his emotions to influence random tosses of the dice at the craps table in the Las Vegas casino that hired him to be a cooler or human jinx. Dr. Leskowitz spoke to experts at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, also known as the PAIR Lab, about their research on similar random processes.
I came into it because I saw something strange happening on a student project, and I wanted to find out whether it was real or not. And on the basis of what I hope has been rigorous empirical study and analytical work, I have had to face the realization that there's something substantial going on here, and that there is a very real implication.
Consciousness is creative. this is something that most people don't really properly understand, I believe, and it's an important addition to our, I guess, self-conception as human beings. Ultimately, we're able to show that when people do enter into a kind of coherent state, resonant with each other, there is an effect on our data, fairly regular and persistent, so that over time we're able to produce a highly significant database of that, as far as we know, might as well be described as looking at consciousness fields operating to change the behavior of these physical instruments.
It's basically a statistical demonstration device. You see machines like this sometimes in science museums. They indicate how random processes produce a typical bell-shaped or Gaussian curve, and seeing if we can try to understand a little bit better this very mysterious interaction between the self and the world. In brief, these anomalies were defying any known physical theory.
So if one person could mentally induce a tiny shift in the trajectory of these marble-sized balls, couldn't 35,000 people cause one baseball-sized object to move an inch or two? The fans believe it could.
We are determinant of what happens in the world in a fashion that it's more than just reaching out with your hand and turning the key. Now, what you wish for becomes more likely.
We're dealing with tiny effects here. I mean, these are not levitating the boxes off of the tables, but tiny effects over large databases make for significant effects. These things are indeed the Ouija boards of the future.
Intention in the laboratory produces changes in the random behavior of these devices. We decided to work on miniaturizing, really, making the devices themselves small enough to take out into the field.
According to statistics, if you flip a coin 10 times, you'd expect 5 heads. If you got 6 heads, you wouldn't think much of it. But if you flipped the coin 10 million times and got 6 million heads, you'd know some process is at work. This computer electronically flips a digital coin thousands of times per second and analyzes the results.
Now, we've taken the boxes to baseball games, football games, basketball games, whatnot, and they do react. One could certainly imagine putting a couple of these around in Fenway Park and seeing what happens game after game, actually doing some statistics on how the output of the box is correlated with the quality of the game, or the outcome of the game. That, I am confident, would produce some interesting correlation.
So here's what we did. We took a laptop carrying a random number generator program to Fenway Park and set it up during the game. The computer generated a steady stream of electronic ones and zeros while translating them into a visible indicator, the yellow ball that you see, which rotates forward if the ones are predominant, backwards for zeros. While the game was being played, I was making note of important game events, and then we'd check afterwards to see if there were any correlations between these events and the rotations of the yellow ball, now translated into a graph's peaks and valleys. The baseline represents an even 50-50 spread of forward or backward rotations. Anything outside the gray zone would be statistically significant.
The results look random at first, but so many statistically significant spikes occurred in that 2-hour block that the odds were 100,000 to 1 that it just happened by chance. And when we matched these spikes to game events, the connections were striking. NRTs at bat, a 9th inning rally, and the 2 biggest spikes, the Wave and Sweet Caroline.
Music, movement, and heartfelt affection. Those are strong enough to affect the quantum level of reality. Maybe that's why places like this seem so alive.
But is it the place or is it the people? We'll hear proponents from both sides, but first...
Stop there, but just to give you a feel for how some of the key researchers in this field are right here in this room right now. And so that was cool to find that the correlations actually, it did correlate with the key game events, and especially the ones that had the most emotion that was conveyed by the singing and the movement. So something to keep in mind when if you're working with groups and wanting to bring that energy along. So that was the setup. And just to give you a slower look at it, it's a different way of presenting the data than the peer people do, and I'm hoping in the discussion to get a sense of that, because this has moment-to-moment fluctuations from the baseline rather than the cumulative totals from their form of graphing. And it's a different software program that I'm working with, so it may reflect things differently as well. But almost all of the top 7, I think I had identified as key moments in the game, key emotional moments. 4 of them were clearly reflected in this graph. You know, the last in the ninth inning, the song, the rally, etc. And well, that's just the famous Red Sox moment where the ball stayed in the air just by a matter of inches, and who knows whether it was the body English of 37,000 people that kept it in play. So this type of formatting that Princeton folks do, the global consciousness people that Roger and his group do, and I'd asked him to analyze one particular Red Sox game. And it was this was much more recent. They won the World Series again just a year or 2 ago, and there was some very important emotional moments which I tried to fit into the data, which you're definitely not supposed to do, but it's too tempting for me to resist, because this particular victory, this pitcher had been belittled the year before because of some bad behavior and not going along with the best interests of the team. And he basically resurrected himself and won the key game in great fashion. So when he walked off and tipped his hat, that was a really intense emotion. Unfortunately, just as the chips fell, the statistically significant moment was actually somewhat before that event happened. So this just illustrates the pitfalls of trying to force retrospectively the data into what your hypothesis is. And Roger's been very vigilant about how you have to set up your hypothesis beforehand. You can't do this. So I guess as a non-statistician, I can get to do some of this fun stuff, and I feel like I have to be rigorous. And then the Super Bowl from just a month or so ago was extremely dramatic, had a couple of extremely dramatic moments, which I would have thought would register, but didn't. And so there's a couple of unanswered questions, at least in my mind, about this. This formatting is averaging the results from 45 different random generator setups around the world. They weren't in the stadium the way I had done in mine. So one of the questions is, to what extent is that a significant impact? Are there different methods of analyzing the data streams that matter? It's certainly something that I had hoped to get the Red Sox more involved in and invested in, but didn't have luck with that. Just one final aspect to this is that people who are rabid fans of any sport, they feel that their stadium has some special quality. They get a little bit over the top and call them cathedrals, and implying that there's a form of worship involved. We actually, in the video, interviewed some fans, and the extent of their passion is, put this way, I'm a psychiatrist, and they were more than 2 standard deviations behind the norm of what's considered normal, healthy behavior. But if that's the passion that makes it work, then so be it. So I did some work along the lines of what the pair people have done to have a random number generator sequence before the game, an hour or 2 before anybody arrived, and even in the off season when nobody was thinking of arriving, nobody was about to arrive, nobody had just been there, and very, very rough measurements, because we really didn't have enough data to do more than just an educated guess, but they're using a weighted averaging system to see how many big and really big deviations there were in that 20-minute interval. In the off season, the weighted average came out pretty low. Pre-game, there had been a couple of fairly significant blips, and then during the game, much higher average. So it looks, this is a suggestive way of thinking that the stadium kind of comes alive as more people participate in it, whether they're there physically or even pre-game, and just some sort of, I don't know how this would be, some sort of anticipatory energy starts to fill the stadium by people's intentions that know they're going to be there in an hour, or something like that. This is another stream of evidence that suggests that human attention and intention can have an impact on machinery. And this is follows the notion developed by William Tiller, a Stanford physicist who did work on what he called conditioned spaces. And his model was a laboratory in which the only activity that occurred in this room was meditation. When people weren't meditating, no one was allowed to enter or disturb the setting there. And with repeating this intensive meditation over many, I don't actually know how many hundreds or thousands of times, they would begin to detect chemical changes would occur. For example, leaving some pure water, the pH of the water would shift by as much as 1 unit just by sitting there. Even though nobody was there, no chemicals were added to it. They did chemical reactions, and the speed of the reactions changed. They did some very hardcore science measurements to show that something very different had happened. The space was performing, was manifesting different behaviors and functions than what you would expect just from that room. So, and these were changes that were imprinted and stayed there. So the question is, what happens on a longer-term basis in places like Lourdes, where thousands of people have been praying passionately for decades? I'm actually not sure how far back that goes. The theory would be, is there some sort of conditioned effect that influences anybody who goes there? You feel this new vibrational quality just by walking into the place. You know, if you've been to sacred places, shrines, or what have you, sometimes you can feel it. It's always a question of, you know, am I just excited to finally get to Lourdes? Is it just a cognitive thing? But apart from that, what else is there? So there are, you know, obviously many places around the world that have this sort of quality. And this is from, well, almost 20 years ago that the pair team did some of these measurements in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. And there are other sacred sites that haven't been measured. This is Stonehenge. Another quick aside, if you ever had a chance to go there, it's really large. It's really large. And it's in the middle of wheat fields on all sides. And a couple of years ago, I guess it's 20 years ago, overnight, the wheat field across the street manifested a change in the pattern of the wheat growing, in what was known as a crop circle. This is Stonehenge. This is huge. So this pattern is gigantic. And it just appeared overnight, in which the wheat lies down in these circular areas and is growing normally elsewhere. It's a whole other anomalous phenomenon that is mind-boggling, because there's no plausible mechanism by which regular people could create something like this. But what's interesting also is what's the vibe there? What would happen to a random number generator? So we haven't had a chance to do that test yet, but we did put some fairly sophisticated biomedical equipment inside one of the. So I was the resonator for that one. I had an opportunity to visit England at a time when it was crop circle season, and I got to sit in the middle of a crop circle, and it's a very cool feeling. Like I told you, there's this part of me that was basically saying, "This is really cool." And that kind of inner dialogue can get your physiology going. But it's been a couple of times, and I sort of got used to being able to sit and settle into it. And there's a way in which meditation or deepening processes happen much more quickly. And I was able to attain a state of a lot alignment in a matter of seconds that would normally take me minutes or an hour or more to do. So something was different. I guess I'm suggesting that this space was also conditioned by whatever influence creates crop circles. And next time around, I would like to do that kind of random number generated assessment as a more objective measure of what might be going on. So let me just finish up by talking about how you can maximize your energetic impact as a fan, or really participating in any activity. It doesn't have to be sports, for sure. But all sorts of human endeavors are benefited when, your understanding of balancing energy systems. There are different meditations that some of you may be familiar with, kind of from the Tai Chi or Qigong lineage, energy healing lineage. It has to do with your limiting beliefs, because if you're in a frame of mind of doubting and worrying, oh my God, what if this happens? That prevents the full expansion of the energy field. So you focus on the positive emotions like love, appreciation, literally focus on the area of your heart, that's the heart math model, and enjoy it. Enjoy the positive intentions and sing, whether that's symbolically or literally, sing your cheers and playing, having that playful attitude as well. So that can, make the game more enjoyable to you, but it can have an influence on people there. And when you talk to, in the DVD, we've interviewed players about what their experience is, how important it is to have fan energy behind them. And we also spoke to some musicians, and they talk about they can really get in the groove. That's the musical term, getting in the groove when the audience is into it. And if the audience could care less, they don't play. And so they actually learn to feed off the energy that's there. So it's difficult to measure. There are some of these more indirect, suggestive ways that have come out of Princeton, but it's clear that something real is going on. And if you'd like to continue exploring it, this is at least one of the resources. That's the website for the movie that we put together. I should say that the movie actually, because of some Boston connections, was picked up by PBS. And so that Princeton segment was aired on 40 different PBS stations around the country a year and a half ago. Many of the stations chose to put it in the choice 2 a.m. time slot. But it still got out there, and we're kind of working on another cycle. I've come across a fair number of coaches, sports psychologists, and athletes who are interested in sort of the subtle energies of sports performance. And we've got a new group that's formed. It's called the Sports Energy and Consciousness Group. And it's surprising how many former NFL players really are into using their body's energies to maximize their performance. We tend to, if you just look at football, it's so brutal. You wonder how anybody could recover from all the concussions, even think in this way, but it's very exciting to see how much interest is developing along those lines there. So that's the basics of what I want to present to you guys today, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Pass the mic around,
Well, if she wants to pass that, we should perhaps come up. Do you want us to go up?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Well, should I do it from here? Well, I'll stand up anyway. I would like to speak to the concept of the sacred space. This is a component of the pair work that we did not talk about in our technical literature, but it was a very important one. I might mention first, I was delighted that you put up or told the story about the Ether Dome, because many years ago, Bob and I had an opportunity to give a talk there as well. And we had a very nice reaction. And like you, there was something about that environment And I think the environments is critical. I would not underplay this sanctity of Fenway Park. I think we worked very hard. Well, I can't say we worked hard, but we put a lot of effort into creating a sort of whimsical sacred space that we called the Pear Lab. That was in an environment that was less than supportive. But people came and they felt it and they responded to it. And one word that kept coming up over and over again from visitors, from our operators, was resonance. And let me say one other thing about resonance and sacred spaces. We also had an opportunity to visit some of these ancient spaces. Not Stonehenge per se, but we did go to Newgrange and LaFou and a few other really ancient places in Great Britain. And we did a study there where we measured the acoustical properties of these environments and discovered that virtually all of them had been constructed very deliberately to create a resonant cavity that would create standing waves at a particular frequency that was very close to the human voice. In fact, it was the human voice. It was a low C, was it? It was in the baritone range. But the amazing thing about that was that when we plotted these acoustical waves, we discovered that we were virtually replicating much of the rock art that was associated with these sites, particularly Newgrange. Nobody had ever figured that out before. There's now a whole field of archaeoacoustics. We're sort of smug about it. We're not involved in it, but we sort of help kick it off. But I only say this, that the sound, the resonance, the environment, if you will, the potential well in which this wave sets up its standing patterns is part of the magic. And I'm just taking advantage of your time to push this because we've always been rather cautious about talking about this sort of speculative, anecdotal stuff. But now that I'm no longer affiliated with the scientific community, I can tell you folks it's real and it works.
No, great. I would encourage you to let her rip. Because there's some just really amazing stuff that it's hard to squeeze into the academia. And that's part of why Mesmer was so kind of resonant, because he got extruded from the establishment. And it's really a testament to the work that you guys have done, that you were able to stay here and keep that connection. And I'm sure it took its toll on you too, but it did establish that kind of presence. So the sound and the acoustics are just amazing phenomena. One of the most intense, I would say, religious experiences I had. I was raised in the Jewish tradition, but had an opportunity to go to Paris and Notre Dame Cathedral when they were singing the evening vespers. And the acoustics there are just, the sound comes from all over, and inside and outside, and you can't help but resonate to it, and it's just very powerful. So there was a science of that's 600 years old, or no, it's more than that. I don't believe they're 900 years old. But that they, at some level, understood how to do that, how to create these echo chambers for standing waves and the like.
There was one other dimension that might be worth mentioning, and that was when skeptical people who disapproved of what we were doing, came into our laboratory. They were inevitably uncomfortable, and it was really fun watching them. They couldn't wait to leave. Talk about resonance.
So you're suggesting that they couldn't handle that kind of energy? It was too high. Oh, that's a very interesting thing. Yeah, that was your test. Had like new applicants or something. If they screwed or not. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Yeah. Let's try that.
When you are talking to people in the scientific field about all this stuff, I'm very
very supportive of it. I'm not involved in the scientific community whatsoever. But do you see that people are very into what you're talking about, or is there a lot of people that come after your work and say this is total BS?
I think the Princeton people have gotten much more flack than I have. I've been sort of cagey, I guess you could say, because I can couch it in alternative medicine type of language. And that's actually made a lot of headway. I think it's a big part of why our kind of paradigm is shifting and ways of thinking are changing. Because like when I went to medical school, meditation was considered crackpot. And now it's, you know, mindfulness everywhere. I mean, even congressmen is a meditator and things like that are really well established. Acupuncture is very widespread, whereas I went to medical school in the late 70s, so, you know, whatever. I remember telling my anatomy professor about the acupuncture experience. A couple of Americans had gone to China, I think it's an open China, blah. One of the famous reporters developed appendicitis and got his surgery done with acupuncture and analgesia. So I told him about it, and he couldn't take it in. You could say you could see how he would say, "Well, it's the Chinese. Chairman Mao says it's going to work. They're so brainwashed. I believe it's going to work." He couldn't integrate the fact that an American would benefit by it. And it was just like a monkey wrench that didn't fit. It's very different now. So there's a lot of work on what the mechanism is. I think the way this movie works is kind of like a Trojan horse, because a simple lecture about random number generators and global consciousness wouldn't connect to more than just the core people who are into that. But by couching it in terms like sports or music, so many people have experienced something. You don't know what it is, but you feel it, and that's why people like going to that particular band's concert or that particular team's performances. So I think it's getting there. This work is not accepted in the Harvard community. I'm really an outlier. It's because my clinic isn't one of the main clinics, one of the main hospitals in one of the centers that I basically escape notice. To be honest with you, I'm using the Harvard connection shamelessly. But if high enough people knew about it, I think it would be a different story. But it's changing, and there's a famous physicist, Max Planck, who had the statement that paradigm shifts occur one funeral at a time. That literally the old generation dies off. And for example, in medicine, the medical students who are coming in now, they do some rotations in our clinic, and they've already done their own Reiki certification training, or they've been trained as a massage therapist before they went to medical school. So they're wide open to this stuff. So it's really changing quickly now, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a tipping point that we're about to see. So, anything else that
I have a comment. Where are you supposed to hold this mic? Okay. I had a friend who was long gone, but he was a cooler. He could break any machine he stood next to, and he did not touch it necessarily. He simply stood there. And one of his greatest triumphs was he put ABC television off the air from the Empire State Building, and he took down both transmitters. Not just the main, but the backup, because he was also a TV engineer. And he was quite amazing. I won't go through all the details of all the things he broke, simply by being present, but that has always stuck in my mind.
Did he have an intention to do this?
No, he didn't. This was completely automatic and unconscious. I could sometimes tell when he was going to do it. You get a certain feeling. And you would say, okay, Bruce, what are you going to break tonight? One of his other triumphs was he bought a brand new Porsche. It was a gorgeous little machine, and he loved cars. And I looked at him, and as he was leaving out the front door, I said, "You're going to break, Bruce." And he said, "I'm not going to break. It's new. It's brand new." And He started it up, and I heard this incredible crunch and crack out in the front yard. And he broke something which is sort of shaped like a Y. It snapped. And the dealer and the mechanic said, "You can't break that." But Bruce could. And I was convinced by his repetitive, many, I mean, I didn't do statistical analysis, but it was quite obvious when Bruce was around, things would break.
Thank you. That's another aspect of this whole thing. And I've spoken to people who are who could perceive human energy field. If you want to go that far, that they can sense it.
Do it, so.
Okay, so that the folks who have these, the light bulbs go out or something like that, their field is strong and not aligned. So,
Well, this guy was wobbly. And the very first time I ever met him, which was at a football game in grammar school, he drove me nuts. Because we were on opposite sides playing touch football, and I would smash into it as hard as I could. I was in the line.
Touch football, you said?
Yeah. But I mean, you're trying to rush. This is touch football. He wouldn't break. He would bend. It was like hitting a bowl of taffy. And it was the weirdest sensation. I should have been able to smack this kid and knock him over. I couldn't do it.
And that reminds me of stories of martial arts masters who, there's, you can have like this little old Chinese lady who's 80 years old and weighs 80 pounds, and the football players come after her and they just bounce off her.
Yeah.
She'll get her energy so aligned and grounded that physical muscle doesn't have no impact.
I don't think he did this on purpose. It's just the way he
Yeah,
was.
right. So he unconsciously had been born with that sort of,
But he was so bendable. It was unbelievable.
and of course, not surprisingly, the Pentagon has looked into those sort of applications too. Who stare at goats and that whole trajectory, that using these energies for not quite healing purposes. Yeah, not healing purposes. Anything else?
Lots of interesting things going on. But I think that probably the point you made and Brenda also discussed about sacred spaces is probably right at the center of the whole business. And I'll just mention a couple of things that I experienced in the field, REG experiments. In Egypt, we went to all the sacred places, the active temples, that we could, which were not under threat from terrorists at the time. And all of them, with one exception, produced pretty strong deviations of the sort we expected. The exception was a temple, Philae it's called, that was moved from its original location because they were building Aswan Dam and it would be completely inundated. So this temple was no longer in the place where the gods said it should be placed, so to speak. I had a fairly long period of time living in Europe, and I did a cathedral series, a field REG experiment. Every time I went to a cathedral when there was some big ritual celebration going on, I had these strong deviations. I went to a place in Wyoming. It's called Devil's Tower. Many of you may have been there or seen it. Remarkable natural monument. Sorry? I'm sorry.
Oh, is it the one that was in Close Encounters?
Yes. Yeah. But I went there with a Shoshone shaman and some other people, and his mission in life as a shaman was to heal sacred places, which had been damaged thoughtlessly by tourism and what all, in a spiritual sense. So we did some other things. We circled that tower many times. And then the last time was with the shaman. And we walked with him until he found what he called a power spot. And there he did ritual, which consisted mainly in drumming and smoking something that probably wasn't
a drug, but it sure smelled interesting. And he sang and chanted, so forth. This went on for 20 minutes, and the deviation, the cumulative deviation trace was like that. I had told him what we were doing before, and he said, well, okay. And when I showed him that trace, he said, now I know what you mean. Sacred places are right at the center.
Yeah. No, thank you, Roger. Those are great anecdotes, great stories. And I agree with you.
Now, Rick, let me just change it slightly. Sacredness, it isn't just places. It's the spiritual quality that we recognize when something sacred is a place.
Yeah, and just the fact that certain spots on the planet, or whatever that is. One of the models is that the Earth is a living organism and has the same kind of acupuncture meridians, and energy sensors that human beings do, or that animals do. There's veterinary acupuncture, so it's not a placebo effect that there's something going on. And there's earth acupuncture, and that's what the indigenous people did. They didn't use a magnetometer to find the region of the highest energy. They felt it, and they were drawn there, like the way the shaman found that particular spot. And they're doing their ceremonies would activate and intensify the energy flow. Those, you may have heard the term ley lines, LEY lines. These are the acupuncture meridians as described in England. They're everywhere, but southern England tends to have this high concentration. That's why Stonehenge, Avebury, places like that were built there. And another theory is that's why the crop circles happen there, is because whatever the intelligence is that builds these, that creates these circles, is attracted to areas where there's this highest intensity of energy. And there's also kind of a dark side to it too. We had been to a stately home a little bit north called Stonor, S-T-O-N-O-R, that the family name was Stonor because when they built the first version of it, 800 years ago or something, they took the original stone circle and reassembled it into a chapel. And some would say, well, it was just conveniently located rocks. But the kind of the esoteric angle to it was that this had been a sacred site, but when the church wanted to take control of those energies, it dismantled the energy generating system of the stone circles and tried to harness their churches and chapels into it. But they didn't know about all these alignments, couldn't be captured, but that it was actually an intention to dismantle the Earth's energy field. And there's, depending on how far into conspiracy theory you want to get, that's been an ongoing effort. And now there are what we call them New Age shamans or indigenous shamans whose mission is to reawaken the energy field of the Earth, into this model of a whole energetic transformation. That's one place that it happens, and that there are specific techniques using the resonant power of sound. I participated in one where it was a conch shell, and that created the vibration, the chanting, and most importantly, all of the intention. So it's big. And, I think the sacredness is the element of it that we all resonate to. And I think, that's not emphasized in our culture, but people are finding their own ways to access that. So, yeah.
A couple of points. First of all, regarding the whole issue of the uncomfortableness of people that are skeptics in these sacred spaces, it may not be quite directly related, but following Chris Carter recently wrote a book on near-death experiences, mentioned that when he was a graduate or undergraduate student somewhere, Arthur Clarke came to lecture. And as you know, in Arthur Clarke's literature, there's a fair bit of telepathy going on. So he has his opinion of telepathy. And Clarke says, it doesn't exist. And he says, well, why do you say that? Because I don't want it to exist. In other words, there's no scientific value. He wasn't talking to like James Randi or Daniel Dennett or any of those people, you know, that don't think it exists. It's just that he was afraid that someone would look into his mind and see his private thoughts, which I think is probably the basis of a lot of skepticism, to begin with, is that deep-seated fear of their personal integrity being violated by a universal consciousness field, if you will, which is my other point, is that I hope you don't get hooked up too much into the electromagnetic aspect of this. This goes beyond electromagnetism. I am currently working on the idea of a quantum consciousness field, a field that where the quanta are our individual awarenesses, although it's in a panpsychic framework, so even the electron would have consciousness, but I call that passive consciousness as opposed to ours, which is active consciousness, less waveform experiences. And the other thing is the morphic field, Sheldrick's morphic field, has kind of inveigled its way into this model. So, but yeah, the electromagnetic field would then be probably controlled by the morphic field from the consciousness field prior to that.
Great point. And I think I emphasize magnetic fields because it's something people can relate to and it's accepted. But I think it's the next level down. It's a little bit more concrete than the morphogenetic field or the consciousness field. And then there's a whole hierarchy of density that you start with the most, the adjective is, but just the consciousness itself, pure consciousness. And it sort of precipitates down into matter. And there's all sorts of levels below that. But I think EMFs, electromagnetic fields, are something that people can relate to.
Oh yeah, it's the way of measuring it.
Right, and that's a really important caveat.
Oh, I forgot to mention one other thing, and this should probably be private. About the centrioles and the field lines of force. Check out Anirban Badanapady's work on high-frequency resonances, quantum level high-frequency resonances in microtubules, which for microtubules not only control a lot of stuff going on in the brain.
I'm not going to remember that. Could you send me that?
He's at MIT too.
Oh.
Yeah, so he's right across the street from practically.
Yes.
I visited him last fall, and he was at the Towards the Science of Consciousness conference in Tucson.
Wow.
So really like that.
Wow. Okay.
He's dealing with Penrose Hameroff Orca-Lar theory of wave function.
Right. And just that part of that theory, at least the part I've been exposed to, is that there are subcellular elements called microtubules that help form some of the architecture in cells, but that also have a very pronounced ability to resonate, and that might be how some of these ripple effects happen. So you raised one question that I want to hear some thoughts on. How can, for example, it can't be electromagnetic fields that influence events in the distance, and the global consciousness monitors detect things that happen thousands of miles away when there's no magnetic field that can go that far. Why did our measurements in the park seem to be more sensitive than the measurements of the network? So that's just something I want to put out there. Let's hear from them.
Rick, I want to be sure to thank you personally for coming out on this visible today to talk to this tiny audience. Simply to show you guys are with it. It's an effective lesson. I had another comment for you, however. You mentioned the ether belt. You're connected. I too and Brenda had their experience in ether. For my sins, I sat for many years as chairman of the board of Associated Universities, Inc. Consortium, which had delegates from a large number of universities for facilities at Berkeley, and a major astronomy facility, where there was no possibility of any one of them having a perfect as a group, they were able to band together for one to do. One thing on their agenda was the Harvard Medical School. And the delegate, one of the two delegates, was your colleague, Bill Sweet. I don't know whether you knew him or not. He was a crusty, very delightful fellow. Fortunately, as gone. But on one occasion, Brenda, I'm going to come to the point here. Brenda and I went to talk first. Brenda had Mrs. Sweet's evening women's group, and secondly, I myself had the evening group. And Bill, he was also very enthusiastic about what was going on in our work. Made quite a point of validating it. We were impressed with the reception we got at these talks, which were very interested, very active, and long talked about after we had been there. So you will find people that eat their own, sure, that still remember our project and all those factors.
That's great to know, because what I knew about him was that he's a neurosurgeon, a brain surgeon. Right, for pain management. So it always seemed to me that it's the other perspective altogether, that you change something in the brain in order to get behavior and experience to change, rather than you work with consciousness first. But the fact that he was open to your work, I mean, that says something about, that's what a great scientist is. They're open to something new with those data. So that helps to hear that. Thank you for sharing that.
It's always very surprising to go to talks at places like this to very conservative, very academically whatever audiences, and inevitably, when you finish your talk, and several, people leave, there's always going to be several who stay behind, and they will kind of walk up to the front carefully, approach you, and always check to see and lean in and say, I don't tell too many people this, but I'm really personally interested. I've had some interesting experiences, and the openness is much wider than I think they believe. And I truly believe that the vast majority of the population is quite open to this. And it has just been, if you will, a paranoia, what do you call it, a conspiracy theory approach. But I personally believe that the mainstream science domain has an investment in maintaining their authority by reinforcing their rules and rule systems and undermining or ridiculing people who challenge that. And it's human nature. You're a psychiatrist, you know all about that. But this is pretty consistent. When you get to people one-on-one, they're there, but they're afraid to talk about it because they're afraid they're going to get ridiculed. And as you were pointing out with Mesmer and all the way back, this isn't new. This is a topic that has been considered and has indeed influenced science tremendously, but from behind. And then science comes along and collapses their wave function, so to speak, and they can't resonate anymore. But anyway, we are starting to get close to 4. I'm very happy to keep going if people want to talk, but while I grab the mic, let me just point out to all of you that Rick has brought some of his DVDs, and his books. And for any of you who are interested in more information, please feel free to buy one. You'll probably get him to sign it.
Half of the proceeds from sales of my books are going to ICRL.
Oh, no. Well, thank you. That's very generous of you.
Partly a donation to keep this going as well.
And as in the past, we have an assortment of our ICRL press books, which are offered at discount. And I might put in a plug for our most recent book called Centropy, Spirit of Love, which just came out a month or so ago. And I mention it because it addresses a lot of the topics that Rick has touched on. Resonance and connectedness, and the fact that the magic is in the attraction, the love, the heart that unifies two parts that, takes atoms and makes them into molecules. And I understand that when atoms form molecules, there's usually some sort of a strange, anomalous exchange force that emerges out of that is more than just the added energy of the constituent atoms. So this gets into some hard science too. But it's a good book, and it touches on a lot of these things, and has a fairly simple answer to so many of the scientific paradoxes. Namely, if you stop thinking that time only goes in one direction and moves towards increased entropy, and accept the possibility that time moves from the future to the past in a unifying, connecting manner, then you get into wonderful understandings of how you can get those phantom leaf effects and a whole bunch of other neat stuff. One more thing, then I'm going to shut up. On the back table, there is an assortment of pair publications. We were doing some archiving, and we found a whole bunch of surplus publications. We were thinking getting rid of them because we really didn't need that many. It was taking up space. And it was suggested that this might be something that people here might be interested. So I invite you to take a look, help yourself, no charge for those, just take anything you like, take two, if there's more where they came from, and help yourself. And again, I'm going to give the mic back to Rick. I want to thank you once again for coming and making these meetups so fascinating.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that too, but just by the comments, I can sense how you're resonating to somebody that they're not new, that they make sense and they're building on something. One, to pick on one of many points that you made about neurosurgeons. There's another neurosurgeon who has helped America approach the tipping point or move past the tipping point. He was trained at Harvard also. That's Eben Alexander, the person who wrote about his near-death experience, called Proof of Heaven. He, near-death experiences, that's not supposed to be happening if your brain generates consciousness. His brain was destroyed by meningitis, and he had the most vivid experience of his whole life when he appeared to be in a coma. And it doesn't fit into the standard paradigm. But he's really gotten a lot. It was, #1 bestseller. He also had the same experience when he gives talks. People come up to him afterwards and say, something like that happened to my uncle or me or something. And I think it's just happening, one by one, and gradual ways. But it's picking up momentum. So he's another one that his model wouldn't have predicted any of this, but his experience was so intense that he gave up his old way of thinking about things and embraced something new. Any other comments or questions or?
Just a thought about environments again. I find it interesting that among the most avid fan bases in baseball are those whose teams are still playing in their old stadium. And meanwhile, baseball has been going around tearing down all these sacred spaces to make money, and the teams fall apart. I mean, you've got Fenway, you've got Wrigley Field, I think the one in Detroit is still there, but there's not too many.
Yankee Stadium,
They tore down Yankee
See,
Stadium.
they built the, that's actually a good test, because they built the replica, but it's a different place and doesn't have the
Nope.
vibe.
And we won't discuss Ebbets Field.
Yeah, I was just going to mention regarding what Brenda said about some of these people where we go to places where you naturally expect a lot of skeptics or people who are in the orthodox scientific community. I don't remember who this person was. He was at a medical college. It came either the dean of the medical college or some high-level administrator there. And he would have personal talks. Apparently everybody was on staff there in the faculty. And some of the students too, but really important thing is the faculty. The MPs, they were already there as professors. They all told him these weird stories. Every last one of them. So what does he do finally after a number of years? He gets up in public at a public meeting of the medical college and says, we've all had these stories, let's bring it out in the open. And from then on, they rejected him. I think he had to resign or something. So it's something where they all agree they had these experiences, but when it gets out in the open in the Orthodox community, you have to slam it shut and put a lid over it. Anyway, so good friends there because that brought that story up.
No, there's a powerful stigma.
Even though everyone is privately.
Privately, goes back to what you're saying, privately versus in their role as a member of that larger community, it doesn't jive. So that's why, meetings like this are important for people to get validation from a larger community that something important is going on. So don't want to hold you up from buying books and there's one more.
If you're not aware of it, I might mention that there is a society called the Society for Scientific Exploration that is a place where oddball researchers can huddle for warmth. It's well established. It's been around for over 30 years. It publishes a referee journal and a newsletter, and they're going to be having their annual meeting in the Washington area this May. And you might want to check it out if you enjoy these types of gatherings and hearing about interesting topics and forefront research from people who aren't afraid to go against the system. I encourage you to check out their website is scientificexploration, one word, .org. So look into it. As I say, try it, you'll like it.
You had mentioned that the younger medical students are more interested in alternative medicine. I was wondering if there's any increase in the research going on, research that you have done.
There's a lot more research that's being done in alternative medicine, or as we now call it, integrative medicine approaches, and things like yoga and mindfulness have really large databases. Acupuncture as well. The problem, and that's great, but the problem is that they're done in the paradigm of the double-blind controlled studies, where, for example, in acupuncture, everybody with low back pain gets treated by the same 7 points, acupuncture points. That's not how acupuncture is practiced in the real world. You could have each individual patient getting a totally different acupuncture protocol because their energetics are slightly different. Shows up as this one particular symptom. But from a traditional Chinese medicine point of view, that's an invalid protocol. So sometimes you get good results and sometimes you don't. And often it's because we're trying to fit a more organic, natural diagnostic and treatment process into a very mechanical, rigid treatment model. So the database is building, and this generation of medical students are definitely going to take it. One important event was Andrew Weil. He's sort of one of the PBS doctors who's been out there with his interest in integrative medicine for a long, long time. He's gotten approval for a fellowship, a specialized training in integrative medicine with a focus on research. And he's already, maybe even as many as 100 doctors have gone through that training. So they go out there with their mission to do more research on this type of stuff. It tends to be more on herbs and more concrete things, not so much on, you know, just this intentionality or really tangible weird things. But it's really changing. It's really changing. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.